Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ask the Email Expert. And I'm here with Paul. And Paul is a seasoned veteran when it comes to email, especially in accessibility and usability. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, and thank you for inviting me along.
We're happy to have you here. So, usually we ask our experts, what is your relationship like with your inbox and what's your go to productivity tip?
Yeah, my inbox is full of. I just sign up to lots and lots of emails, essentially, really for inspiration a lot of the time, and yeah, so I spend a lot of time doing that. Um, I actually write quite a bit these days, as opposed to kind of day to day in the email creation process. And so, yeah, in terms of productivity, what I find and what I found helpful actually a little while ago, um, was to identify in my day when I am actually the most productive. So when am I at my best? And when am I going to get the best out of myself? And it's actually quite a good idea because then you find you're spending the best part of your day doing the things maybe you find a little bit more demanding, and so where you need the most concentration. So probably my biggest tip is to actually find that time in your day. So for me, that means early in the morning, I tend to write at that time of day. So when I'm writing my own emails, for example, which I'm actually in the process of doing at the moment, I tend to write those and the copywriting for those in the first couple of hours of the day, really, because my concentration levels are high and I can think
Yeah.
really well. And then what I tend to do for inspiration, I tend to do that towards the end of the day, because I don't need so much of my concentration at that time, and I'm kind of looking at in my inbox and seeing what's around, what's interesting, what are the things that are being done, some well, some not so well, and identifying areas where I can help, and I can kind of offer kind of advice and direction. So yeah.
For me personally, I find that I work better at night. I work better in chunks in the day, and then at night when my all of my creativity, all of my brain cells are kind of resting. I just go through my inbox as a last lap, and I save it for the last thing for the day. So it's interesting. Setting aside a time really does help. Did you find that creating that habit of setting the time for your inbox was kind of hard at first? Did you know what was your best work time, or did you have to experiment with times?
Yeah, I did have to experiment really, and sometimes that was a bit of a frustration and a bit of a pain barrier to get through. Perhaps going through times when you're realizing actually you're not kind of giving it your best and you're not quite sure why, um, and then you find actually I'm I'm better at certain times than others. Also, what I found, I tend to fill my time with doing things, and I had a bit of an enforced break, even over the last week, because I wasn't too well and I couldn't work. And what I found in that time was that actually it gave my brain space to come up with some new ideas and think a little bit clearly. So those kind of things. So giving yourself a bit of a break, and I think that's what I'll be doing this weekend is giving my head some space, and that just helps productivity as well.
Makes sense. Makes sense. It does. I think a lot of people think that out the gate, like you can just develop a habit to be productive in your inbox the
Mm,
same day that you decide that this is what I'm going to do. But as you
yeah.
said, it takes time. It definitely does take time. So I'm going to ask you, what are some tools that you use, or tips that you use in your inbox apart from setting time that you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, so from that, when you've got a good idea of kind of what's a good time to do things, is to use that and leverage that to plan your day out. It's a good idea to set a goal as well. Um, Oftentimes things happen in the day that kind of make those goals not achievable, but at least you've got something to work with, which is really helpful. Um, and in terms of actual managing that, I use a tool, um, uh, called Toggle, and it's basically a tool for measuring and tracking time for.
Time management.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. And I started using it. What I didn't seeing the tool when I first started using it was it's got this timer in called a I can't pronounce it now. A pom, pom, I can't think of what it's called. It's is it Podomoro, something like that. It's a timer that basically tracks 25 minutes at a time. And then it stops after like 25 minutes of time. The idea is that you work 25 minutes and then you have a 5-minute break and you continue doing that. And that's really helpful just to really focus your time and your productivity. So I tend to do that, especially when I'm writing again. So I'll give myself a little bit of a break after 25 minutes. But again, you find yourself more productive than, say, if you're doing like 2 hours solid and you're not giving yourself enough of a break. And it's actually, and it gives you it helps you to kind of meet those goals as well. So that's really helpful.
It would help, especially if you're someone who easily gets distracted, and it helps you to be a little bit more productive in smaller chunks. I like that. Thank you so much. Yeah. So let's go over to the business side of emails. Now, I know that you're an expert in usability and accessibility. And can you tell me the importance of that when it comes to emails for business owners?
Yeah, accessibility is really about making, well, anything that you apply accessibility to is making it easy for people to use. And so when it comes to email, it's really about making your emails as easy to use for all your subscribers. And so that means if you're doing that, it means that more people can use them. So there's a direct commercial benefit from doing that, because if you're making them easier for people to use, more people can use them. And that impacts your return on investment, because by virtue of more people can actually read and engage with them. So that's, that from a commercial point of view, that's really important. So there's ways of doing that. There's lots of different ways you can implement accessibility into email. Things like ensuring that the text size is large enough to read, for example. Colors are contrasting enough so that they're clear. And then things like usability. So buttons are selectable by people, regardless of whether they, some people might struggle by selecting things on a screen or with a mouse. And it's making, again, it's just the principle of making it easier for people to use them. So, it makes complete business sense, as well as being the right thing to do, which is why I started doing it in the first place.
My mentor says, you never trip over a boulder, but you always trip over a pebble. And it's always those little things that can make the difference in your email. It's never the big, massive thing. It's always a little minute detail when it comes to the psychology of getting someone to interact with your email.
Yeah, and that's right. And it's really about not having assumptions either, approaching email design and development without those assumptions. And it's easier for us to go into design and development with a bias and say, well, I can do this, therefore everybody else can. And actually, that's not the case. And so you really have to give yourself a good kind of look in the mirror, as it were, and have a critique what you're doing, and to really examine what the impact of what your design decisions are. I mean, we had this went through this process years ago when mobile phones started to come onto the market, and emails needed to go responsive. And when we went from this place of a big email on a screen to something a lot smaller, and it's an evolution from that in one sense. Why would you make it hard for somebody on a mobile phone to read it? Equally, why would you make it for anybody else who wants to read it as well? And the other thing to mention about accessibility as well, it changes it from just a visual medium to being an audible medium as well, because people engage with emails through screen readers and audio technology. So it's how your email sounds is an important consideration, just as much as what it looks like.
So I would also ask, what are some of the 3 tips that you would give people who are trying to better their emails for usability and accessibility? 3 important tips or rules that this is not a trend, this is not a fast track, this is a solid foundation in making it work when it comes to your emails.
Yeah. Well, text size is one of those. I tend to recommend 16 pixels as a font size on emails, simply because that's a good size. There is actually no minimum size specified, even by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the go-to guidelines for accessibility. But 16 point is that kind of good starting point.
So the sweet spot in
It
text.
is a bit of a sweet spot. Though you have to be aware that on mobile devices the pixels are smaller because they have higher resolution displays. On Apple they're called Retina displays, and so they actually reduce the size of the pixel on those. So what happens there? It actually reduces the size of the text. So you compensate that by enlarging the text a little bit, so maybe 18 pixels. So font size is really important.
That makes sense.
And also the fonts themselves need to be what are called live text. So the text itself is built with HTML and not embedded in an image, because that helps screen readers read out the email. And also, I mean, from a usability point of view, if your images are switched off or your data connection is not that great, you can't see the images, but you can still see
You
the
can't see the email. Yeah.
yeah.
But you can always see text. You can
always see text. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, I mean that you may have received the email in your inbox. You can't see the images because there's no connection, but the text still remains in the email, so that your business message is still there. It's still there for people to see. So that's really important. And then the actual interaction, the call to actions, and links and buttons. Have buttons so that they're what called bulletproof. So again, they're built with HTML, and they're not images. Again, you get the advantage of it being able to be readable by a screen reader. It means that you can select it on the button as well. And again, it's always there, even if images are switched off, the button remains. So people actually know where to select it when they come to doing that. So yeah, and then colors are the other thing, about ensuring that they're contrast enough. It's also important to ensure that colors contrast as well. There's nothing worse than having poor color contrast. I've seen examples recently where there's been, say, white text on a yellow background, or even the other way around. So you've had yellow text on a white background, and it's difficult to see for anybody, let alone people who may struggle to see things. It's quite challenging. Again, and that comes back to that whole principle of don't make it harder for people to engage with it. Make it as easy as possible. So yeah, so that's really important, and that's really almost like the thing you need to keep in your mind all the time. If you can make it easier, whatever you can do to make an email easier to read it and respond to, that mindset will really help.
That makes sense. I mean, people already have this love-hate relationship with their inbox, and if you make the email harder for them to just go through, it's almost like you're giving them work to figure out what you're trying to tell them. So I would ask, what are some common mistakes that you see brands make when it comes to just overall emails? Some people are, I mean, during the whole shift that we experienced from 2019 to now, emails are being sent way more than usual at higher volumes. So it's a lot of competition for people to get other people's attention and going past the subject line into the actual email itself, because you've triumphed, but you can also fall out there. What are 2 mistakes that you see people making very easily that could be avoided?
Yeah, so one mistake I see quite often is the misuse of alternative text in the what we call the alt attributes in the email that describe the images. And really the mistake is often because it's not really been thought through, and it's kind of almost because you can't see them in the design itself, and really you don't see them when you're proofing out an email. They are hidden behind the code. So as a consequence, what you end up with is sometimes just numbers being used for alternative text, so that if a screen reader reads out an image, all it reads out is a number. Or it could be something that's really generic and it doesn't really help the person who's having the email read out to them understand what the image is. So it's been mindful of those things, and yeah, so that's one common mistake that I see happen quite a lot.
My question is just to divert a little bit is I see that you're using the word screen reader, and I wanted to know, is it that the number of people nowadays are using speech, text to speech more often than viewing their emails compared to before?
They've always used that technology, but as an industry, we're starting to appreciate the fact that people are doing that, and then ensuring what we're doing is helping them. I think it's probably before we began to take accessibility seriously, it was kind of an ignored aspect of it, really. And I think the fact that the alternative text hasn't been done so well is partly because of habit, because people haven't done it as part of the process. And so, so that's something that needs a little bit more kind of thought, and probably really engaging with other members of the team as well. The code tends to be worked on by a developer, but really that aspect of an email is really a copywriter's role. So it's where you have the team dynamic working together, where you've got your designer, your copywriter, and your developer working together to kind of put all the pieces together. So it's recognizing where the strengths are within that team, and pulling on those, and getting the copywriter involved in writing those pieces, albeit the fact that you don't see them on the surface. They're still there to experience for people who use the technology, or indeed anybody who doesn't have their images loaded up on their screen as well.
Yes, I agree 100%. I think sometimes we give too much power to, or too much on the developer who's doing the code and too much on the copywriter. I think it should be a perfect balance, since both of them need to, and the other teammates need to actually put together the email from just a technological standpoint and from a psychological standpoint as well. So I fully agree. I think one of my last questions would be, what do you see happening for the email industry in 2022? And what would you like to see happening in the email industry for 2022?
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on in the email industry right now, isn't there? With the announcement from Apple the other week, and the impact of metrics, or the lack of metrics on the email industry, and how as marketers we do email. And I think that's probably one of the things that we kind of have to think about, is that email in the future will look different from what it does now, because of things that are happening with concerns over issues like privacy, and people are becoming more savvy about technology and what they do want brands to know about them and what they don't.
Their privacy, they feel
Yeah,
more in control of their inbox.
that's right. And I think I actually take that as a great challenge to us as an industry, because I think it's possible to get lazy with metrics, and because an open rate, it may be high, we can say, oh yeah, everything's okay, but actually I kind of think, well, do you know what, if this challenges us to up our game, and increase the quality of what we're doing, in all the aspects of email, and then that is only going to be good for us. It's going to deliver better quality into people's inboxes, who are more likely then to engage with it and want to read it and use it. Um, that, so I think that will be, something that will continue, and I think it won't happen overnight, but we'll start to see more of that need to really not rely on perhaps what we've relied on for the last 10, 20 years of doing email. For me personally, it's all about accessibility, really.
Yeah, of course.
And I think a challenge to myself is really understanding more about how people engage with the technology, and again, continually asking, how can we make things better for people? How can we make things easier for people? And what I want to see is more of is actually more usability testing with people, and that's something that will start to come to fruition when there's some forthcoming guidelines by the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines authors that are coming out in the next few years that will encourage the digital industry to do real testing with real people. So that will kind of bring out some of the things that are that maybe we're not either not aware of at the moment, or we're not doing so well. So I think that'll be really good to see.
Well said. Well said. Because after all, emails are about people, that one-to-one channel
That's
connecting
right.
with that person, regardless if you're doing professional outreach or you're doing it for sales. It's all about that one-to-one. Yes. Awesome. So thank you so much, Paul, for dropping by and giving us
Thank
some
you.
very good gems on usability and accessibility, and for sharing your own productivity tips as an email expert.
Thank
Um,
you.
And if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe and share this video with someone you think would help. And we're going to have a email expert every week. So be sure to check out our new videos. And that's a wrap for this week. And we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you.